Michael Sterling stood in the marble entryway of his Westchester mansion, watching the 14th housekeeper in 12 months gather her belongings with trembling hands. The woman, Mrs. Patricia Henshaw, 53, references impeccable, had lasted exactly 9 days, a new record of failure. His voice carried no heat, only the flat certainty of a man reading quarterly projections. The severance check covers 2 weeks. HR will process your final pay by Friday. Patricia's eyes brimmed, but she didn't argue. No one argued with Michael Sterling. The industry magazines called him the Ice Tycoon, and he'd long stopped correcting the nickname. Ice didn't betray. Ice didn't scheme. Ice simply was. The heavy oak door closed behind her with a sound like a gavel. Michael turned toward the east wing, where his grandmother occupied a suite of rooms overlooking the rose garden his grandfather had planted 40 years prior. The scent of those roses, white, always white, drifted through open windows, even now in early autumn, a reminder of permanence in a world that kept proving itself temporary. Margaret Rose Sterling sat in her wheelchair near the bay window, sunlight catching the silver in her hair. At 78, she maintained the posture of a woman who'd chaired charity galas and intimidated board members for 5 decades. The stroke 6 months ago had stolen strength from her left side, but left her mind sharp as the crystal paperweights lining her desk. She didn't look up from her book. "Number 14, I presume." Michael poured himself 2 fingers of scotch from the sidebar, though it was barely noon. She rearranged the study, moved father's ship models to a lower shelf. "Heaven forbid," Margaret said, dry as August grass. "And the real reason?" He took a careful sip, letting the burns settle before answering. "I found her photographing the Rembrandt in the library. Phone angled to avoid the security camera." Margaret finally met his gaze. Her eyes, the same slate blue his father had carried, the same shade Michael saw in his own mirror, held equal parts weariness and understanding. "You put too much faith in suspicion, my dear. It makes for a very cold house." Michael crossed to the window, looking down at the rose garden. His grandfather Henry had taught him to prune those bushes when Michael was 8, explaining that sometimes you had to cut away the beautiful parts to help the plants survive. 3 years ago, his business partner Robert Chen had taught him the same lesson from the opposite direction, that beauty and trust could conceal rot until the damage was irreversible. $18 million gone. A decade of partnership revealed as calculated theft. The scotch turned bitter on his tongue. "I can't afford another mistake." "You can't afford to live like this," Margaret countered. "Alone in a house built for a family, treating every kindness like a con." He didn't answer. The argument was old, worn smooth by repetition. Margaret wanted him married, settled, producing great-grandchildren to spoil. Michael wanted security, control, the certainty that came from keeping the world at arm's length. These wants could not reconcile, so they simply circled each other, an orbit as predictable as the Earth around the sun. Margaret shifted in her wheelchair, and Michael saw the wince she tried to hide. The stroke had been mild, Dr. Patterson's word, not his, but recovery proved slow. She needed help dressing, help bathing, help with the 100 small dignities that aging stole one by one. She needed someone she could trust. They both did. "Sterling Enterprises posted another ad this morning," Michael said, checking his watch. "A Swiss timepiece, accurate to within 1 second per year. Predictable. Reliable." HR received 43 applications by 10. "And how many will you sabotage before they even arrive?" Margaret asked. "I don't sabotage. I vet." "You terrorize." But she smiled, just slightly. "At least interview this batch before you consign them to the ranks of the unsuitable, for my sake, if not your own." Michael drained the scotch, set the glass down with precise care. "I'll review the files tonight." "Tomorrow," Margaret corrected. "Tonight you're having dinner with the Vanderbilts. Chamber of Commerce fundraiser. You committed 3 months ago." He'd forgotten entirely. The realization sent a small spike of irritation through his carefully maintained composure. not at the obligation, but at the slip in his own mental accounting. Michael Sterling did not forget appointments. He did not lose track of time. These were the weaknesses that led to mistakes, and mistakes led to vulnerability, and vulnerability led to men like Robert Chen walking away with millions while lawyers argued jurisdictional technicalities. "I'll send regrets." "You'll attend," Margaret said, voice hardening into the tone that had raised him after his parents died. "And you'll smile, and you'll write a generous check, and you'll remind the world that Sterling Enterprises thrives under your leadership. That's what Henrys do, Michael. We don't hide." The use of his middle name, his father's name, his grandfather's name, settled the argument. Michael nodded once, sharp as a salute, and left to prepare for an evening of performative philanthropy. The Vanderbilt dinner passed in a blur of practiced handshakes and strategic conversations. Michael donated $50,000 to the scholarship fund, danced once with Eleanor Vanderbilt to satisfy protocol, and departed before the dessert course. He was home by 10, tie loosened, already reviewing the stack of applications his assistant had flagged as promising. Most he dismissed in under a minute: gaps in employment history, references from relatives. One woman listed "excellent at keeping secrets" as a primary qualification, apparently unaware that discretion and deception wore the same face. The application near the bottom of the stack almost joined the rejection pile out of pure fatigue. Grace Elizabeth Mitchell, 32, 5 years at the Plaza Hotel's housekeeping department, followed by 18 months of freelance residential cleaning. Single mother, 1 dependent child. His finger hovered over the keyboard, ready to type the form rejection. Then he read the personal statement. "I won't pretend I'm perfect for this position. I don't have a college degree or fancy certifications. What I have is this. I show up. I work hard. I notice the details that matter, not because I'm trying to impress, but because I care about doing things right. My daughter Sophie is 6, bright as a new penny, and learning that sometimes life requires you to be brave even when you're scared. I'm teaching her by example. This job would help me give her the stability she deserves. I hope you'll give me the chance to prove I'm worth the risk." Michael read it twice. The honesty felt almost aggressive in its directness, a challenge disguised as humility. He checked the references: 5-star reviews from hotel management, glowing testimonials from private clients. One note stood out: Grace has a gift for making spaces feel like homes again. He scheduled the interview for Thursday morning. Grace Mitchell arrived at Sterling Manor exactly on time, neither early enough to seem desperate nor late enough to suggest carelessness. Michael watched from the second-floor window as she climbed out of a 10-year-old Honda Civic, smoothing a simple gray dress that had seen better seasons but remained immaculately clean. She carried no briefcase, just a leather folder tucked under one arm. He made her wait 15 minutes in the entrance hall. A test. Some candidates paced. Others pulled out phones and buried themselves in distraction. Grace Mitchell sat perfectly still on the antique bench beneath the Monet, hands folded in her lap, studying the painting with the kind of attention most people reserved for mirrors. When Michael finally descended the stairs, she rose smoothly and extended her hand. "Mr. Sterling, thank you for meeting with me." Her grip was firm, her palm slightly rough. Working hands. Honest hands. Michael released her fingers and gestured toward his study. "This way." The study was his father's room, really. Dark wood paneling, leather chairs worn soft by decades of use, built-in shelves holding first editions and maritime models. A Rembrandt sketch occupied the wall behind the desk. Nothing museum-worthy, just a preliminary study, but genuine. The safe stood in the corner, a squat black cube that held documents and occasionally cash when Michael didn't trust the banks. Grace took the chair he indicated, spine straight, ankles crossed. Professional. Composed. Michael settled behind the desk and opened her application file. 5 years at the Plaza, he began. Then you left to freelance. Why? She didn't hesitate. Flexibility. Hotel hours meant Sophie was in after-school care until 7 most nights. I wanted to be home for dinner, for homework, for the conversations you can't get back once they're gone. Financially risky choice. Yes. No defensiveness, just acknowledgement. But some risks are worth taking. Michael made a note on his tablet, more to observe her reaction than to record anything meaningful. She didn't fidget. You understand this position requires live-in availability? My grandmother needs care at irregular hours. I saw that in the posting. Grace's brown eyes held his without challenge or submission. Sophie comes with me or I can't accept. I won't apologize for that, but I also won't waste your time if it's a deal breaker. The bluntness caught him off guard. Most candidates would have danced around the complication, tried to minimize it, promised vague solutions. Grace Mitchell laid her cards on the table and waited for him to call or fold. Something in his chest shifted, just slightly, a hairline crack in ice that had frozen solid 3 years ago. The manor has 12 bedrooms, Michael heard himself say. 2 in the east wing are unoccupied. You and your daughter would have privacy. Separate entrance if you prefer. Grace's shoulders lowered a fraction of an inch. Relief, carefully contained. That's very generous. It's practical. He stood, gesturing for her to follow. Let me introduce you to the person whose opinion actually matters. Margaret was in the garden when they arrived, her wheelchair positioned in a patch of afternoon sunlight. She'd clearly been waiting, lipstick applied, pearls on, the good shawl draped over her shoulders, performing the role of gracious matriarch, but Michael caught the calculation in her eyes as Grace approached. Mrs. Sterling. Grace offered a small bow, respectful without being obsequious. It's an honor to meet you. Margaret's gaze traveled from Grace's sensible flats to her carefully pinned hair. You're younger than I expected. 32, Grace confirmed. Old enough to know hard work, young enough to have the stamina for it. A smile ghosted across Margaret's lips. You've done your research. Michael's told you I'm demanding. He told me you deserve quality care. Grace crouched slightly, bringing herself to eye level with the wheelchair. I'm not a nurse, Mrs. Sterling. I can't administer medications or handle medical emergencies, but I can make sure you're comfortable, that your space feels like yours, that someone's paying attention to the details that matter, how you like your tea, which shawl you prefer on cool mornings, whether you want company or silence. Margaret studied her for a long moment. Then, with the authority of a woman who'd run board meetings and raised a grandson, she said, Tell me about your daughter. Grace's entire demeanor softened. Sophie's 6, first grade. She loves books, hates peas, and has opinions on everything. Last week she announced she wants to be a marine biologist, even though she's never seen the ocean. I'm saving up to take her to Cape Cod next summer. What happened to her father? The question was invasive, deliberately so. Michael almost intervened, but Grace answered without flinching. He left when Sophie was 2. Decided fatherhood was too hard, marriage too confining. I haven't heard from him in 4 years. His loss, my gain. Brave words, Margaret said quietly. True words. Grace straightened, and Michael saw steel beneath the gentle exterior. I won't apologize for my past, Mrs. Sterling. I can only promise to work hard in your present. Margaret's hand lifted, beckoning Michael closer. He leaned down, and she whispered, Hire her. Today. He pulled back. We haven't discussed. Hire her, Margaret repeated, louder now. Or I'll do it myself and dock the cost from your inheritance. Grace's lips twitched, almost but not quite a smile. Michael found himself mirroring the expression. $5,000 a month, he said to Grace. Room and board included. Health insurance after 90 days. 1 week paid vacation after 6 months. Trial period of 1 week, during which either party can terminate without cause. Grace's eyes widened. Mr. Sterling, I was expecting 4. I know what you were expecting. This is my offer. He extended his hand. Do we have an agreement? She gripped his palm again, that firm, honest shake. "We do. Report Monday morning, 7 sharp." Grace nodded and excused herself. Michael watched her walk back toward the house, noting the way she paused to examine the roses, running gentle fingers along a petal before continuing inside. Margaret's voice carried amusement. "You didn't run your usual interrogation." "I ran enough." He reclaimed his position behind her wheelchair. "And you clearly made up your mind in 30 seconds. "I'm old, Michael. I've learned to trust my instincts." She patted his hand where it rested on the wheelchair's handle. "Besides, you need someone who isn't afraid of you. This house has been afraid too long." Monday morning arrived cold and clear, October asserting itself against the last remnants of summer warmth. Grace Mitchell appeared at 6:45, 15 minutes early, dressed in dark jeans and a blue sweater. A small girl with Grace's eyes and darker hair clung to her hand, backpack nearly as large as her torso. Sophie Mitchell regarded Sterling Manor with the solemn attention of a child encountering something far outside her previous experience. Her whisper carried in the quiet morning air. "Mama, is this a castle?" "It's a house, baby." Grace squeezed her daughter's hand. "A very big house where we're going to be helping some very nice people." Michael emerged from the breakfast room, coffee in hand. Sophie's eyes went wide, and she performed a small curtsy that Grace had clearly not taught her. The gesture was so unexpected, so charmingly unpracticed, that Michael felt his carefully neutral expression crack. "Good morning." He crouched to Sophie's level, the way he'd seen Grace do with Margaret. "You must be Sophie." She nodded, solemn. "Are you the king of the castle?" "Sophie," Grace started, mortified, but Michael raised a hand. "Just the owner," he told Sophie seriously. "Kings have much better crowns." Sophie considered this, then decided he was acceptable. "Mama says we get to live here. Do you have a library? I like libraries." "Second floor, west wing. 2,000 books, last time anyone counted." He straightened, addressing Grace. "I'll show you both to your rooms. You can get settled before starting your duties." The East Wing quarters exceeded anything Grace had expected. A bedroom with an ensuite bathroom. A smaller adjoining room perfect for Sophie. Shared sitting area with a window seat overlooking the gardens. Simple furnishings, quality linens, and blessed privacy. Sophie was already exploring, opening closets and testing the softness of her new bed. Grace turned to Michael, something vulnerable flickering across her features. "This is too much." "It's what's available." He handed her a folder. "Your schedule, Margaret's care routine, household protocols. Questions can wait until you've had time to review. I'll be in my study." He left before she could thank him again, uncomfortable with gratitude he didn't feel he'd earned. This was business. An employee, a salary, clearly defined terms. Nothing more. The first 2 days passed smoothly. Grace moved through the manor with quiet efficiency, learning Margaret's preferences, adjusting routines with small, thoughtful touches. She opened curtains to let in morning light, brewed tea exactly the way Margaret preferred, and read aloud from the stack of mystery novels on the bedside table with genuine dramatic flair. Sophie attended school, a small private academy 3 miles away, tuition now covered by Michael's amended employment package, and returned each afternoon to do homework in the library under her mother's watchful eye. She drew pictures in crayon, elaborate scenes of houses and families and impossible animals, leaving them scattered like colorful promises throughout the manor. On Wednesday morning, Michael decided to implement the test. He'd used variations before with previous housekeepers, small temptations designed to reveal character. A piece of Margaret's jewelry left carelessly on a dresser, an unsealed envelope containing cash positioned near a trash bin. Once, with a candidate who'd bragged about their discretion, a leather journal left open to a page of fictional business secrets. Everyone failed eventually. The jewelry vanished, the cash went missing, the journal was photographed, its contents leaked to a competitor who turned out to be the housekeeper's cousin. Grace Mitchell would be no different. Michael simply needed proof before she revealed her true nature. Better to catch the trap before it sprang than to deal with the aftermath of betrayal. His study was the perfect stage. He spent Tuesday evening arranging the scene with the same precision he brought to merger negotiations. The safe stood open, not obviously so, but visible if someone looked. Inside, stacks of $100 bills, $50,000 in total, though it could have been $50 for all the difference it made to his net worth. What mattered was the temptation, the test of character. He scattered 5 bills across the Persian rug near the safe, artfully casual. A man who'd been counting cash and grown careless, perhaps, or simply someone so wealthy that a few $100s were too trivial to track. Wednesday morning, he positioned himself on the leather sofa near the window, laptop open, spreadsheet visible but ignored. At precisely 9:15, Grace's scheduled time to clean the study, he closed his eyes and arranged himself in an attitude of exhausted sleep. Head back, arms loose, breathing deep and even. Waiting. Footsteps in the hallway, soft and measured. A gentle knock. Grace's voice, carefully quiet. "Mr. Sterling? May I clean the study?" He didn't respond. The door opened with a whisper of hinges he deliberately left unoiled. Grace's presence entered the room like a change in air pressure, something he felt more than heard. She moved to the bookshelves first, the soft swish of a dust cloth against leather spines. Michael kept his breathing steady, fighting the urge to crack an eyelid. Patience. She'd find the money soon enough. The dusting stopped. Silence stretched, taut as wire. Then footsteps, crossing toward the safe. His pulse kicked up, despite his best efforts at control. Here it came, the moment of truth. She'd pocket the bills, maybe leave 1 or 2 to avoid suspicion, and then... Grace's voice, humming. Soft, tuneless, the unconscious sound of someone alone with their thoughts. The rustle of paper, the small exhalation of breath, but no footsteps toward the door, no guilty retreat. Michael's control wavered. He opened his eyes to slits, just enough to see through his lashes without revealing consciousness. Grace knelt beside the scattered bills, gathering them with careful fingers. She smoothed each one, examining the bills as if checking for damage. Then, instead of pocketing them, she began arranging them on the corner of his desk. First a square. She frowned, rearranged them into a circle. Another pause, lips pursed in concentration. Then she formed a heart, a perfect heart shape. $500 transformed into geometry and whimsy. Grace stepped back, tilted her head, and from somewhere in her apron produced a yellow sticky note and pen. She wrote something, placed it carefully beside the money heart, and returned to her dusting. Michael's throat constricted. His chest felt strange, tight in a way that had nothing to do with the scotch he'd consumed the night before. This wasn't the script. This wasn't how the test worked. Grace crossed back to the bookshelves, still humming. The tune resolved into something recognizable, an old jazz standard, Ella Fitzgerald, maybe. She sang under her breath, words soft enough that he caught only fragments. Something about stars and dreams and the foolishness of hoping. He should reveal himself, acknowledge the test, acknowledge her passing it. Move forward with the cool professionalism that defined his every interaction. Instead, he watched her work. This woman who'd turned his trap into art, his suspicion into something achingly gentle. A laugh escaped him. Small, choked, utterly involuntary. Grace spun around, dust cloth clutched to her chest. "Mr. Sterling, you're awake." He coughed, buying time. "Just now." Her eyes narrowed, a smile tugging at her mouth. "Just now? Or just now laughing out loud like you've been watching a comedy show?" The echo of her interview words thrown back at him. Michael sat up, abandoning pretense. "How long have you known?" "That you were faking?" She crossed her arms, not defensive but amused. "Since you fell asleep at exactly the moment I was scheduled to clean in here. People don't doze off that perfectly, Mr. Sterling. They fidget first, Shift position. Your laptop was still showing an active spreadsheet. Dead giveaway. Heat crept up his neck, an unfamiliar sensation. Michael Sterling did not blush. He did not get caught. Yet here he was, exposed by a housekeeper with sharp eyes and sharper instincts. He gestured at the money heart. And yet you still made art out of your test? Grace's smile widened. At home, Sophie and I arrange coins into flowers when we're bored. I thought your money looked lonely. Figured it could use some company while it waited for you to wake up and put it away properly. She crossed to the desk and retrieved the sticky note, holding it out to him. Michael took it, reading the looping handwriting. Money needs organizing too. Helps it multiply. G. The simplicity of it, the complete absence of guile, struck him harder than any business setback. This woman had seen through his deception, acknowledged it with humor, and responded with kindness anyway. No anger at being tested, no wounded pride, just a sticky note and a heart made of cash and the tune of an old jazz song fading into silence. I'm sorry, he said, and meant it. That was unfair. Grace shrugged, tucking the note back beside the money. You're careful. I respect that. Better to test me now than trust me blindly and regret it later. She met his gaze, and he saw understanding there, the kind that came from hard experience. My ex-husband was a liar. Charming, smooth, said everything I wanted to hear. I learned to watch what people do, not what they say. So I get it, Mr. Sterling. I do. The knot in his chest loosened, just slightly. Still, it wasn't kind. Kindness is overrated. She returned to her dusting, matter of fact. I'd rather have honesty, even if it comes wrapped in fake sleep and money on the floor. Michael gathered the bills, placed them back in the safe, and locked it with a definitive click. But he kept the sticky note, slipping it into his desk drawer where it nestled among contracts and financial reports. A small, bright spot of yellow in a sea of black and white. Grace finished her work and left. Michael sat alone in the study, staring at the closed drawer, feeling the hairline crack in his ice chest widen just a fraction more. That evening, as October dusk painted the sky purple and gold, Michael found himself lingering in the doorway of the library. Grace sat cross-legged on the floor, Sophie sprawled beside her, both absorbed in a picture book about whales. Grace's voice rose and fell with the rhythm of the story, adding dramatic flair to descriptions of ocean depths and giant creatures. Sophie's laughter, pure, unself-conscious, joyful, filled the space between the shelves. Margaret appeared at his elbow, silent despite her wheelchair. That sound, she whispered. When did this house last hear that sound? Michael couldn't recall the last time these rooms held anything but his own footsteps, his own controlled breathing, his own careful isolation. She passed your test, I assume? Margaret continued, watching Grace and Sophie with satisfaction. She turned it into a heart. Of course she did. Margaret patted his arm. That's what people like Grace do, Michael. They find the broken things and make them beautiful again. The question is whether you'll let her. He didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Could only stand in the doorway and listen to a child's laughter and a mother's voice, and feel something in his chest that had nothing to do with cold calculation or strategic thinking. Something that felt dangerously like hope. The second week transformed Sterling Manor in ways Michael hadn't anticipated. Grace moved through the rooms like weather, inevitable and renewing. She opened windows that hadn't tasted fresh air in months, rearranged furniture to catch better light, filled vases with branches she clipped from the property's overgrown edges. Nothing dramatic, nothing that violated his carefully maintained order, but the house began to breathe differently. Margaret noticed first. On Thursday morning, she summoned Michael to the sunroom where Grace had positioned her wheelchair to overlook the eastern garden. Breakfast sat untouched on the tray, poached eggs, whole grain toast, fresh strawberries arranged in a smile. Margaret's finger tapped the fruit pattern. She did this. Every morning this week. Something playful. Tuesday was a flower, Wednesday a sun. Today, joy itself on a plate. Michael examined the strawberries, their red brightness against white porcelain. Such a small gesture. Meaningless, really, in the grand arithmetic of daily life, yet Margaret's expression held something he hadn't seen since before the stroke. Delight that reached her eyes. "It's fruit," he said, aiming for dismissive and landing somewhere closer to uncertain. "It's attention." Margaret speared a strawberry, popped it in her mouth. The difference between existing and living, spelled out in breakfast. He left her there, smiling at her food, and tried to focus on the quarterly reports demanding his attention. Numbers refused to cooperate. His mind kept drifting to sticky notes and money hearts, and the sound of Sophie's laughter echoing through the library at night. Friday afternoon arrived with Sophie's return from school. The girl burst through the East Wing entrance like bottled sunshine, backpack bouncing, voice carrying through the halls. "Mama! Mama! We learned about butterflies today. Did you know they taste with their feet? Their feet, Mama!" Grace emerged from Margaret's room, drying her hands on a towel. "That sounds magical and slightly gross." "It's science." Sophie dug through her backpack, producing a worksheet decorated with crayon monarchs. "Mrs. Peterson says we're going to raise real caterpillars next month. Can we, Mama? Can we raise butterflies at home, too?" Michael watched from the second-floor landing, invisible behind the banister. Grace crouched to Sophie's level, examining the worksheet with exaggerated seriousness. "We'll see, baby. That depends on whether we have the right kind of space for them."
Sophie's gaze lifted, traveling up the grand staircase, across the vaulted ceilings, through the expanse of rooms stretching in every direction.
"Mama, we live in a castle now. We have all the space."
The logic was unassailable. Grace laughed, pressing a kiss to her daughter's forehead. "Point taken. We'll research what butterflies need and talk to Mr. Sterling about it."
"Talk to Mr."
Sterling about what? Michael descended the stairs, drawn by something he couldn't name. Sophie whirled, courtesy forgotten in her excitement. "Butterflies! We're going to raise them from caterpillars and watch them transform, and it's going to be the best science project ever, and Mama says we have to ask permission, but you'll say yes, right? Because butterflies are important for the ecosystem, and also, they're really pretty." The run-on sentence left her breathless. Grace stood, hand on Sophie's shoulder, gentle pressure that the girl ignored entirely. Michael considered the request with the same gravity he'd apply to a merger proposal. "What do butterflies require?" Sophie's eyes went huge. She wasn't expecting actual engagement, just adult permission or denial. Now, faced with genuine interest, she scrambled for facts. A habitat, with plants, and it has to be the right temperature, and we have to keep them safe from predators, but also not like trapped forever. They need to be free when they're ready." "The conservatory," Michael heard himself say. "Third floor, south side. Glass walls, climate-controlled, currently housing nothing but dust and some of my grandfather's forgotten orchids." Would that work? Sophie's squeal could have shattered the chandelier. She launched herself at Michael's legs, wrapping thin arms around his knees. "Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm going to take such good care of them, I promise." Over her head, Michael caught Grace's expression, surprise melting into something warmer, something that made his pulse stutter. "You didn't have to do that," Grace said quietly. "The space is unused. May as well serve a purpose." He gently extracted himself from Sophie's embrace. "I'll have maintenance clear it out this weekend." Sophie was already racing toward the stairs, shouting about telling Margaret, about researching milkweed plants, about the miracle of metamorphosis. Her footsteps faded, leaving Michael and Grace in an unexpected pocket of silence. Grace's hand lifted, hesitated, fell back to her side. "She's going to talk your ear off about Lepidoptera for the next 6 months. I survived an MBA and 3 hostile takeovers. I can handle butterfly enthusiasm. Can you handle her getting attached?" The question carried no accusation, just honest concern. Sophie's had enough people leave, Mr. Sterling. I won't let her heart break again if this is temporary. The weight of it settled between them, the responsibility he'd assumed without fully considering its implications. Not just an employee now, but a child's hope, a mother's fear. The fragile architecture of a small family rebuilding itself in the rooms of his carefully controlled fortress. I don't make promises I can't keep, Michael said, meeting her eyes. Your contract is good for a year minimum, longer if this arrangement works for all parties. Sophie's welcome here for as long as you are. Grace studied him, and he had the uncomfortable sensation of being evaluated with the same thoroughness he'd applied to her application. Whatever she found must have satisfied her, because she nodded. Okay then. 1 year of butterfly talk. I'll try to moderate the enthusiasm. Don't. The word emerged before he could calculate its wisdom. This house could use more enthusiasm. It's been quiet too long. Saturday morning, Michael woke to hammering. He checked his phone. 6:45, barely dawn. The maintenance crew wasn't scheduled until 8. He pulled on jeans and a sweater, following the sound to the third-floor conservatory. Grace stood on a stepladder, removing old orchid pots from high shelves, passing them down to Sophie, who arranged them in careful rows on the floor. Both wore work clothes, hair tied back, absorbed in their task. Michael cleared his throat. Grace startled, nearly dropping a ceramic pot. Mr. Sterling, I'm sorry, we didn't mean to wake you. Sophie was just so excited, and I thought we'd get a head start before maintenance. He waved off the apology. You're preparing the space. Nothing wrong with initiative. Sophie beamed at him from her position surrounded by dusty pots. We found 17 orchids. 17! Do you think any of them are still alive? Michael examined the nearest specimen, brown, withered, beyond salvation. Unlikely. My grandfather had the green thumb. Mine's more gray. That's okay. Sophie's confidence was absolute. Mama's good with plants. She kept our tomatoes alive in our old apartment, even when the landlord said they'd die on the fire escape. Fire escape tomatoes, Grace said, climbing down from the ladder. The scrappiest vegetables in Queens. They tasted like resilience and questionable rooftop runoff. The image struck him. Grace tending plants on a metal fire escape, Sophie watching, both of them making life from small spaces and smaller resources. The contrast to Sterling Manor's excess felt sharp enough to cut. The conservatory's yours to design, he told Grace. Budget's not a concern. Make it work for the butterflies and anything else you think the space needs. Grace's protest died before it formed. She simply nodded, then surprised him by extending a dirt-smudged hand. Partners in butterfly raising, then? He shook her hand, feeling soil transfer to his palm. A mark, a claim, a small redistribution of earth. The rest of Saturday passed in unexpected domesticity. The maintenance crew arrived at 8 and followed Grace's instructions for clearing the conservatory. Michael found himself pulled into consultations about shelf height, table placement, where the optimal light fell. Sophie narrated the entire process like a nature documentary, complete with British accent. By late afternoon, the conservatory gleamed. Glass panels sparkled, floors scrubbed clean, new shelving installed at various heights. Empty now, but full of potential. Margaret insisted on being wheeled up to inspect the progress. She sat in the doorway, surveying the transformation with satisfaction. Henry would approve, she pronounced. He always said this room was meant for growing things. Sophie crouched beside the wheelchair. Did you know Mr. Henry? He was my husband, dear. Gone 15 years now. But yes, I knew him very well indeed. Did he like butterflies? Margaret's smile turned distant with memory. He liked anything that transformed. Used to say change was the only honest thing in life. Everything else just pretended to stay the same. Michael felt the words land somewhere beneath his ribs. His grandfather Henry, dead before Michael finished college, had lived by that philosophy. Embraced change, adapted constantly, built sterling enterprises from a regional real estate firm into a national powerhouse by refusing to calcify. Michael had spent 3 years doing the opposite, freezing himself, his life, his trust, into something unchanging and therefore safe. Sophie interrupted his thoughts. Mama says change is scary but also necessary. Like when we moved here. Scary, but necessary. Your mama is very wise, Margaret said. She caught Michael's eye over Sophie's head, one eyebrow raised in a look that clearly said, listen to the child. That evening, Margaret insisted on a proper dinner, not trays in separate rooms, but the dining room table set for 4. Grace protested. Staff didn't eat with employers. Surely that crossed some line. But Margaret deployed the same tone that had raised Michael and won. They gathered at 7. The table could seat 16. The 4 of them clustered at one end, close enough for conversation. Grace had prepared roast chicken with herbs, mashed potatoes creamy with butter, green beans that actually tasted like vegetables instead of obligations. The food was simple, nothing like the elaborate meals Michael's previous cook had produced. But it filled the room with smells that reached back to childhood kitchens and Sunday suppers. Sophie monopolized the conversation, asking Margaret about butterflies in the old days, whether TV was invented yet when Margaret was young, if people rode horses to school. Margaret fielded each question with patience and dry humor, occasionally shooting Michael looks that said, This is what family sounds like. Halfway through the meal, Sophie's attention pivoted to Michael. What did you like to do when you were my age? He paused, fork halfway to his mouth. When was he last 6? Before his parents died, before responsibility calcified into his defining trait. I built things, Legos mostly, cities and spaceships and elaborate fortresses. Do you still have them? Storage, attic probably. Haven't thought about them in 20 years. Sophie's eyes went wide with possibility. Can we look? Please? I love Legos, but Mama says they're too expensive, and I only have the small sets from the thrift store. Grace's hand covered Sophie's gentle correction. Baby, we don't ask for things. I wasn't asking for keeps, just to see. Sophie's logic was unimpeachable. Seeing is free. Margaret laughed outright. The child has a point. Michael found himself standing. Come on then. Let's see what survived. The attic ran the length of the manor, accessible by a narrow staircase off the 3rd-floor hallway. Michael hadn't climbed these steps since his father's funeral, when he'd helped sort through decades of accumulated sterling history. The air up here tasted of dust and mothballs and time. He pulled the cord for the overhead lights. Bulbs flickered to life, revealing organized chaos, labeled boxes, old furniture, steamer trunks from European trips his grandparents took in the 60s. Sophie gasped at the sheer volume of stored memory. It's like a treasure cave. More like an expensive storage unit we never got around to emptying. Michael navigated between boxes, searching for the labels he'd written in college. This way. He found the bins near the back, 5 large plastic containers marked Michael, Childhood in his mother's handwriting. The sight of those letters, her distinctive slant, stopped him cold. 22 years since cancer took her. 20 years since his father followed, heart giving out from grief and genetics combined. Grace materialized beside him, Sophie trailing behind. She touched the label gently. Your mom's writing? He nodded, not trusting his voice. Then we should treat these with respect. Grace crouched, unlatching the first bin. Sophie, gentle hands. Inside, sorted by color and size, lay thousands of Lego bricks. Michael's younger self had been methodical even then, organizing pieces by type, storing instruction manuals in plastic sleeves. Whole cities waited in pieces, ready for reassembly. Sophie's reverence was absolute. She lifted a single red brick like it was spun glass. You saved everything. My mother insisted. The memory surfaced, her voice warm and certain. You'll want these someday, Michael. For your own children. He'd thought she meant biological children, the traditional family progression. Looking at Sophie's wonder-struck face, he realized inheritance took many forms. We can bring them downstairs, he offered. You can build in the library. There's space near the window. Sophie looked to her mother, seeking permission. Grace's eyes held something bright and liquid. If you're sure, Grace said to Michael. That's a generous. They're just sitting here, turning into nostalgia. He lifted the first bin. May as well serve a purpose. They made 3 trips, ferrying bins downstairs. By the time they finished, Sophie was yawning, exhausted from the day's excitement. Grace herded her toward their rooms, promising tomorrow they'd start building. Michael stood in the library, surrounded by his childhood, feeling the walls of his careful isolation develop new cracks. Margaret found him there an hour later, staring at bins of colored plastic. That was kind, she observed. It was practical. It was both. She wheeled closer, examining the bins. Your mother would be pleased. She always said you hoarded love the way some people hoard money, terrified of spending it in case you ran out. The accuracy stung. Michael sank into the leather chair his father used to occupy for evening reading. I don't know what I'm doing, Grandmother. Grace and Sophie. They're not what I expected. This wasn't supposed to be personal, Margaret finished. Dear boy, everything is personal. The only question is whether you're brave enough to admit it. Sunday arrived with autumn rain, October finally asserting its dominance over the lingering warmth. Sophie planted herself in the library after breakfast, Lego instructions spread before her like battle plans. Grace worked through her weekend routine, laundry, meal prep, light cleaning. Michael tried to focus on emails, but found his attention wandering to the soft clicks of plastic bricks connecting. By afternoon, Sophie had constructed a modest house. She carried it carefully to where Michael sat, presenting it like an offering. It's for you, for your desk, so you remember to take breaks and play sometimes. The structure was simple, 4 walls, a door, a roof, windows made from transparent bricks. Nothing elaborate, just honest construction from a 6-year-old's careful hands. Michael accepted it, running his thumb over the textured surface. Thank you, Sophie. I'll treasure it. You don't have to treasure it. She was already headed back to her building station. You just have to look at it and remember that work isn't everything. Wisdom from the mouths of first graders. Michael placed the house on his desk where the sticky note still lived in its drawer, small, bright reminders that his fortress had been breached. The following week settled into rhythm. Grace woke early, helped Margaret with morning routines, prepared breakfast, managed the house with quiet competence. Sophie went to school, returned full of facts and questions and enthusiasm. Evenings found them in various rooms. Library, conservatory, dining room, forming patterns that felt dangerously like family. Thursday night, Michael worked late in his study. The house had gone quiet, everyone asleep, when soft footsteps passed his door. He looked up to find Grace, bathrobe over pajamas, carrying a mug of something steaming. She paused in the doorway. Sorry, didn't mean to disturb you. Couldn't sleep, thought tea might help. Join me. The invitation emerged before calculation could stop it. I'm just reviewing contracts. Could use the distraction. Grace hesitated, then entered. She settled in the chair across from his desk, cradling her mug. Chamomile scent drifted between them. Do you always work this late? Usually later. Michael closed his laptop. Insomnia's an old friend. What's your excuse? Sophie's school is doing parent conferences next week. Nerves, I guess. Want to make sure I'm representing her well. I'm certain you are. You've never been to a parent-teacher conference. Grace's smile held knowing humor. They're social minefields. All the other parents with their advanced degrees and summer houses, comparing notes on prep programs and tutors. I'm the single mom who works as a housekeeper, trying not to feel like I'm failing her. The vulnerability in the admission cracked something else in Michael's chest. You're not failing her. Sophie's thriving. Anyone can see that. Easy to say when you're not the one responsible for her entire future. He leaned forward, elbows on desk. I lost my parents young, 26 when my father died, but my mother was gone before that. You want to know what I remember most? Not the money they left, or the business, or this house. I remember my mother reading to me at night. My father teaching me to tie a tie, to shake hands properly, to look people in the eye. The small things. The attention. That's what you're giving Sophie. Grace's eyes glistened. She blinked rapidly, sipped her tea. How do you do that? Do what? Say the exact right thing when I'm spiraling. I'm good at pattern recognition. It's a business skill. But his voice betrayed him, softening the deflection. They sat in comfortable silence, sharing the space and the late hour. Finally, Grace stood. I should let you work. Thanks for the distraction. Grace. He stopped her at the door. If you want company at the conference, I could attend. As employer, showing investment in employee families. Purely professional. Her smile bloomed slow. That's very thoughtful, but you don't have to. I know I don't have to. I'm offering. She studied him, and he wondered what she saw. The ice tycoon? Or the man who gave away his childhood Legos and stayed up too late talking about parenting? Okay then. Tuesday at 4. Fair warning, it's extremely boring. I've sat through worse. Once attended a zoning commission meeting that lasted 6 hours. Show off? She waggled her fingers in a wave and disappeared into the hallway. Michael sat alone, chamomile scent fading, feeling the walls of his fortress crumble a little more. Tuesday at 4 found Michael in his Mercedes, Grace in the passenger seat, both headed to Sophie's school. The Academy of Little Scholars occupied a converted Victorian mansion in downtown Westchester, all turrets and stained glass, and the particular smell of crayons and institution. Grace fidgeted with her seatbelt. You really don't have to do this. You mentioned that 3 times. He pulled into the parking lot, found a space between a BMW and a Tesla. Consider me moral support. The conference lasted 20 minutes. Ms. Peterson, Sophie's teacher, reported stellar progress in reading, enthusiastic participation in science, minor challenges with sitting still during quiet time, standard first-grade trajectory. What wasn't standard was Mrs. Peterson's reaction to Michael's presence. Her eyes widened when Grace introduced him as her employer. Suddenly, the conversation shifted, became deferential. Mrs. Peterson mentioned the school's upcoming capital campaign, opportunities for philanthropy, how generous donors received recognition. Michael cut her off with practiced corporate courtesy. I'm here to discuss Sophie Mitchell's education, not donation opportunities. Please continue your assessment. Mrs. Peterson flushed, returned to professional mode. The rest of the conference proceeded smoothly. In the car afterward, Grace was quiet. Michael navigated back toward Sterling Manor, giving her space to process. Finally, she spoke. Thank you for shutting down her fundraising pitch. You're welcome. But also, I need you to understand something. She turned in her seat, facing him directly. I can't be your project, Michael. I can't be the charity case you rescue or the social cause you champion. I'm your employee. I work for my paycheck. That's it. The use of his first name registered like a bell. She'd never used it before, always Mr. Sterling, always the professional distance. This felt different, more real. I wasn't trying to rescue you, he said carefully. Weren't you? The generous salary, the beautiful rooms, the Legos, the butterfly conservatory, showing up at conferences like some kind of guardian angel? Her voice stayed level, but he heard the steel beneath. I'm grateful, truly. But I need to earn my place here. I need to know I'm worth what you're paying, not just because you feel sorry for me or Sophie. Michael pulled to the shoulder, put the car in park, turned to face her fully. You think I'm doing this out of pity? I think you're a good man who sees people struggling and wants to help. There's nothing wrong with that. But I've been the recipient of pity before. My ex's family, social services, Every pitying look from strangers when they see a single mom buying groceries with carefully counted bills. I'm tired of being someone's good deed. Her honesty demanded equal return. Michael chose his words with the precision he'd apply to contract negotiation. You're right. I am trying to help, but not because I pity you. He held her gaze. You make my grandmother laugh. You brought life back to a house that was dying. You're teaching me that control isn't the same as safety, that walls don't protect you if you're just building a more elaborate prison. That's worth every penny I'm paying, and more. So no, Grace, this isn't pity. It's self-preservation. I need you here. The confession hung between them, too honest and too raw. Grace's breath caught, her eyes searching his face for deception and finding none. Okay, she said quietly. Okay. But no more surprises. No more grand gestures without asking. If you want to do something generous, talk to me first. We're partners in butterfly raising, remember? Partners communicate. He extended his hand. Deal. She shook it, the same firm grip from that first interview. Deal. Saturday morning broke cold and clear, the first real hint of November creeping into October's final days. Michael woke to his phone buzzing, Margaret's caregiver alarm, set to alert him if she needed help overnight. He ran to her room, heart hammering, found her sitting up in bed, looking annoyed rather than distressed. False alarm, she announced. Hit the button by mistake reaching for water. Sorry to startle you. Relief flooded through him, followed by irritation at the adrenaline still coursing through his system. You're getting one of those smartwatches, with fall detection and easy emergency contact. I'm 78, not an infant. You're 78 and stubborn as granite. Humor me. Grace appeared in the doorway wearing flannel pants and an oversized sweater, hair escaping its braid. Everything okay? Fine. Margaret waved them both away. Go back to sleep. I'm perfectly capable of pouring my own water without causing an international incident. But neither Michael nor Grace moved. Something unspoken passed between them. Shared concern, shared responsibility. Partners in more than butterfly raising now. I'll stay, Grace offered. Make sure you're settled. Michael touched her elbow lightly. Thank you. I'll be in my room if you need anything. Back in his suite, sleep proved impossible. He pulled on running clothes and headed out into the pre-dawn darkness, feet pounding pavement, breath clouding in cold air. 3 miles turned into 5, 5 into 7. By the time he returned, the sun had risen, and the manor blazed with morning light. Sophie sat on the front steps, wrapped in a blanket, watching for his return. You run fast, she observed as he approached, breathing hard. Trying to. He bent over, hands on knees, catching his breath. You're up early. Heard the alarm. Got scared. Mama said Grandma Margaret is fine, but I wanted to make sure you were fine too. The casual use of Grandma Margaret struck him. When had Sophie started calling her that? When had Margaret become family rather than employer's grandmother? Michael sat beside Sophie on the cold stone steps. I'm fine. Just needed to clear my head. Running helps you think? Usually. Today it just made me tired. He bumped her shoulder gently. But talking to you is helping. Sophie considered this, solemn as a judge. Mama says you're like a puzzle box. Lots of complicated locks, but worth opening if you're patient. Your mama talks about me? Sometimes. When she thinks I'm asleep but I'm really listening. Sophie grinned, gap-toothed and mischievous. She says you're kind, but scared. That being scared is okay, but staying scared forever is sad. Out of the mouths of eavesdropping children. Michael absorbed the assessment, found he couldn't argue with it. Your mama is very smart. The smartest. Sophie stood, blanket trailing like a cape. Come on, she's making pancakes. The kind with chocolate chips hidden inside, so it's technically breakfast, but actually dessert. Michael followed her into the house, into the warm kitchen. into the circle of light and laughter that had somehow formed around him without permission. Grace looked up from the griddle, meeting his eyes across the kitchen. Something passed between them. Acknowledgement, understanding, the beginning of something neither had names for yet. Margaret wheeled herself to the breakfast table, perfectly fine, enjoying the drama she'd inadvertently caused. "Ah, Michael, excellent timing."
Grace makes these far better than our old cook ever managed. That's because I use love as the secret ingredient, Grace deadpanned. Also butter. Copious amounts of butter. Sophie giggled. Michael found himself smiling, the tightness in his chest from the morning scare finally easing. They ate together as dawn broke fully over Sterling Manor, 4 people becoming something more, the walls Michael had built crumbling one pancake at a time. The second Saturday of November arrived with Sophie's determination blazing brighter than the weak autumn sun. She descended to breakfast carrying a cardboard box decorated with crayon butterflies, inside which lived 5 fat monarch caterpillars acquired through Mrs. Peterson's classroom science program. Grace trailed behind, carrying supplies, mesh habitat, milkweed cuttings, instruction sheets. Fair warning, these guys eat constantly. We're going through milkweed like it's going out of style. Michael looked up from his coffee, watching Sophie arrange the habitat on the conservatory's main table with the gravity of a surgeon preparing for transplant. The girl had inherited her mother's careful hands, her methodical attention to small details that mattered. "I'll have the groundskeeper plant milkweed in the south garden," he offered. "Native species, enough to sustain a whole colony." Sophie's squeal of delight echoed off glass walls. She launched herself at Michael, arms wrapping around his waist in a hug that knocked breath from his lungs and sense from his carefully maintained boundaries. Grace caught his eye over Sophie's head, mouthing "sorry" with amusement dancing in her expression. But Michael found he didn't mind. The embrace carried warmth he'd forgotten existed, uncomplicated affection with no agenda beneath it. "Thank you, Uncle Mike!" Sophie released him, already turning back to her caterpillars. "I'm naming them. This one's Henry, after great-grandpa. This one's Margaret. This one's Mama. And this one's Mike. And this little one is me." "You're naming a caterpillar after yourself?" Grace asked. "So I can watch myself transform." Sophie's logic was absolute. "Mrs. Peterson says metamorphosis is like becoming who you're meant to be. I want to practice." Michael felt the words settle somewhere beneath his sternum, unexpected weight to a child's pronouncement. Becoming who you're meant to be. He'd spent 3 years becoming nothing, hardening into ice, into isolation, into the shape fear carved when you let it hold the knife. Margaret materialized in her wheelchair, drawn by Sophie's excitement. She'd been growing stronger these past weeks, physical therapy paying dividends. Now she navigated the conservatory independently, admiring the caterpillar city with scientific interest. "Your great-grandfather would approve," she told Sophie. "He believed deeply in transformation. Used to say staying the same was just another word for dying slowly." "Did he transform?" Sophie asked, feeding a milkweed leaf to the caterpillar named Henry. "Constantly. Farm boy to businessman, local company to national enterprise, rough edges to gentleman. He never stopped growing." Margaret's gaze found Michael. He'd be disappointed in anyone who stopped trying. The barb landed gently but precisely. Michael absorbed it without deflection. His grandmother was right. He'd calcified, mistaken stagnation for strength. Grace cleared her throat. "I'll leave you 3 with the caterpillars. Margaret, you need anything before I start on the guest rooms?" "Actually," Margaret said, smile turning conspiratorial, "I need Michael to take you somewhere today." Grace blinked. "I'm sorry?" "You've worked 13 days straight. You need a break. Michael has the day free. Take her to the city, Michael. Show her something beautiful." Michael opened his mouth to protest the manipulation, then caught the plea beneath Margaret's matchmaking.
She wasn't just orchestrating romance, she was trying to pull him back into the world, one gentle shove at a time. Central Park, he heard himself offer. The conservatory garden should be spectacular right now. Late roses, chrysanthemums, the whole autumn display. Grace shook her head. I can't just abandon my responsibilities. You have the day off, Margaret interrupted. Paid, obviously. Sophie and I will be perfectly fine. We have caterpillars to supervise. I'm excellent at supervising, Sophie confirmed solemnly. Grace looked trapped between protest and possibility. Michael watched calculations run behind her eyes, the propriety of accepting, the desire for escape, the careful balance she maintained between gratitude and independence. He decided to tip the scales. I haven't been to the park in 2 years. I could use a guide. Someone to make sure I remember how normal people spend Saturdays. That earned him a reluctant smile. You're manipulating me. Learning from the best. He gestured at Margaret, who radiated innocence. Fine. Grace threw up her hands in surrender. Give me 20 minutes to change into something that doesn't smell like lemon cleaner. She disappeared toward the east wing. Margaret wheeled closer to Michael, satisfaction written across her features. Smoothly done, grandmother. I haven't survived 78 years without learning a few things about nudging stubborn people toward their own happiness. She patted his hand. Now go. Enjoy the day. Try to remember what joy feels like. 25 minutes later, Michael pulled the Mercedes out of the Manor's circular drive with Grace in the passenger seat. She'd changed into dark jeans and a burgundy sweater, hair loose around her shoulders instead of pinned back. The transformation from housekeeper to woman struck him with unexpected force. This feels strange, Grace admitted as Westchester scenery rolled past. Being in the car without Sophie, without work, just existing. When did you last take a day for yourself? She laughed, brittle. To find yourself. Before Sophie was born? A college weekend I can barely remember? Time stops being yours when you become a mother. Everything gets allocated to keeping another human alive and thriving. Michael navigated onto the highway, letting her words settle. And before Sophie? What did you do with unallocated time? Read, mostly. Haunted bookstores and coffee shops, pretended to be the kind of person who could afford leisure. She glanced at him. What about you? What did Michael Sterling do before he became the ice tycoon? Sailed, he said, surprising himself with the admission. My father kept a boat in Connecticut. Summers, we'd take it out for weeks. Just ocean and wind and the complete absence of solid ground. Past tense. Sold the boat after he died. Couldn't imagine sailing it without him. Grace absorbed this quietly, then, voice careful. That's grief. Not honoring memory. You know that, right? The observation cut cleanly through defenses he'd maintained for years. You're very direct. One of my few talents. That and making excellent pancakes. You're good at more than that. Name 3 things. He took the challenge seriously, changing lanes to exit toward Manhattan. You see people clearly. You create safety without demanding it. You transform broken things into beauty without announcement or expectation of recognition. Grace went silent. When he risked a glance, her eyes were bright. That's the nicest thing anyone said to me in 5 years. Then people haven't been paying attention. They drove the rest of the way in comfortable quiet, the city rising around them in steel and glass. Michael parked near the Metropolitan Museum, led Grace through streets he'd once known intimately, but had avoided since his self-imposed isolation began. The conservatory garden occupied 6 acres at the park's northeast corner, formal European design maintained by devoted volunteers and the Conservancy. Michael paid the suggested donation, and they entered through iron gates. Grace stopped immediately, breath catching. The garden blazed with late autumn color, chrysanthemums in bronze and gold, asters purple as bruises, roses clinging to their final blooms before winter claimed them. The air smelled of earth and flowers, and the particular crispness that October brings before November steals it. "Oh," she breathed. "Oh, this is worth the drive? Worth 1,000 drives." She moved forward, drawn by beauty, and Michael followed. They wandered for an hour.
Grace stopped at every plaque, reading about plant species and design history with the same attention she gave Margaret's care routines. She photographed flowers on her phone, not selfies, just the blooms themselves, capturing color and light. Michael watched her more than the gardens, fascinated by her unself-conscious joy. This was Grace without armor, without the careful professionalism she maintained at Sterling Manor.
Here she was simply a woman, delighting in small perfections, free from responsibility's weight. They found a bench overlooking the fountain in the French garden. Grace sat with a sigh, tilting her face to weak November sun. "Thank you for this," she said quietly. "I didn't realize how much I needed it." "Neither did I." He settled beside her, maintaining careful distance. "Margaret was right. I've been hiding." "Hiding requires something to hide from."
"What are you avoiding?"
The question deserved honesty. "Everything that hurt me before. Trust, connection, the risk that comes with caring about things beyond your control." Grace turned, studying him with those earth-brown eyes that saw too much. "And how's that working out? The hiding?" "Poorly," he admitted. "Turns out isolation is just another word for dying slowly." She smiled at the echo of Margaret's words. "Your grandmother is very wise." "Runs in the family, apparently." Sophie's already dispensing philosophical truths about metamorphosis and becoming who you're meant to be. She gets that from books, and probably from watching too many people fail to grow. The comment carried weight. Michael shifted to face her more fully. "Her father. You don't talk about him much." "Not much to say." Grace picked at a thread on her jeans. "David was charming, funny, said all the right things about forever and family." Then Sophie got sick. Just a bad flu. But she was 2 and scared and crying constantly, and he decided fatherhood wasn't what he'd signed up for. Left a note. Took half our savings. I haven't heard from him since. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. I got the better end of that deal. Sophie's worth 10,000 Davids." She met his eyes. "But it taught me something important. Words are cheap. Actions are the only currency that matters."
Michael absorbed the philosophy, recognized its echo in his own practiced cynicism. They'd both learned the same lesson from different teachers, that trust, once broken, became shrapnel embedded in soft tissue. You survived, but you carried the damage. "So what do we do?" he asked. "Those of us with shrapnel." Grace considered, watching fountain water catch sunlight. "We heal. Slowly. We let good people prove themselves through sustained action, not grand gestures. We risk carefully, because the alternative is never risking at all." She looked at him. "We practice metamorphosis, like the caterpillars." "Caterpillars have it easy. They liquefy completely, rebuild from nothing. Clean slate." "Maybe that's what we're doing. Just slower. Over years instead of weeks." The conversation settled into silence, not uncomfortable, but full. Around them, the garden prepared for winter, cutting back, going dormant, trusting spring would arrive as promised. Finally, Grace stood. "We should head back. I don't want to abuse Margaret's generosity." They returned to the car, retracing the route to Westchester. Somewhere on the highway, Grace's phone buzzed. She checked it, frowned, checked again. "Everything okay?" Michael asked. "Probably nothing," but her voice carried doubt. "My ex-landlord in Queens says someone came asking about me. Wanted to know where I moved, if I left forwarding information." Cold spread through Michael's chest. Did he say who? "No, just that they seemed official. Suit and clipboard. Asked pointed questions about my employment status, Sophie's father, whether I had debts." Possibilities cascaded through Michael's mind.
None of them good. Private investigator? Process server? Someone from David's family finally showing interest in Sophie. Could be nothing, Grace repeated, but he heard unease beneath forced calm. We'll handle it, Michael said firmly. Whatever it is, we'll handle it together. She nodded but spent the rest of the drive quiet. Joy from the garden replaced by the particular tension of waiting for the other shoe to drop. They arrived home to find Margaret and Sophie covered in flour, the kitchen a disaster zone of mixing bowls and measuring cups. Apparently, supervising caterpillars had evolved into baking cookies, which had evolved into a full-scale culinary experiment.
We made butterflies,
Sophie announced, holding up a tray of sugar cookies decorated with icing wings. Grandma Margaret showed me how to pipe the colors so they look real. Grace surveyed the chaos with a mother's experienced eye. I can see that. How much sugar have you eaten? Only a responsible amount, Margaret said, utterly unconvincing with frosting in her hair. Michael felt the cold from earlier begin to thaw. This warmth, this laughter, this found family baking cookies in his formal kitchen. This mattered more than mysterious visitors or painful pasts. I'll help clean, he offered, rolling up his sleeves. Grace shot him a look. You don't have to. Partners communicate, remember? Partners also wash dishes. They worked together, Grace washing, Michael drying, Sophie and Margaret decorating more cookies with increasing abstraction. Flour-dusted surfaces, icing pooled in rainbow puddles, and Sterling Manor's formal kitchen became something it had never been, a place of mess and joy and family. Later, after Sophie went to bed and Margaret retired to her room, Grace found Michael in his study. He looked up from his laptop, noting her hesitation at the door. Come in. She entered, carrying 2 mugs. Hot chocolate. Thought you might need it. He accepted the offering, tasted whipped cream and cinnamon. Thank you for today. The garden, the conversation. I needed that. Me too. She settled in the chair across from him. About earlier, the landlord call. I don't want to bring drama to your house. Our house, he corrected gently. And drama finds everyone eventually. Better to face it with backup. Grace smiled, but worry still shadowed her features. I keep thinking about what you said in the garden, that actions are the only currency that matters. You've been proving that since I arrived. The salary, the Legos, today's trip. You keep showing up, Michael. That's rare. So do you. Every day. For Margaret, for Sophie, for this house that was dying before you arrived. Then maybe we're both getting better at this. The metamorphosis thing. Maybe we are. The moment stretched, fragile as spun glass. Michael felt himself on the edge of something, a confession, an admission, a step across the professional boundary they'd carefully maintained. But caution held his tongue, the old familiar hesitation. Grace must have seen the war in his expression. She stood, moved to leave, then paused at the door. For what it's worth, I'm glad Margaret made you take me to the garden today. I'm glad you're letting us in. And I'm glad I took this job, even though it terrifies me sometimes. Why does it terrify you? Her smile turned sad. Because I could get used to this. The safety, the kindness, the feeling that someone's got my back. And if it ends, if this is temporary, it'll hurt worse than anything David did. The raw honesty deserved equal return. Michael set down his mug, stood, crossed to where she waited. I can't promise forever, Grace. I don't know how. But I can promise that whatever happens, I won't abandon you or Sophie. That's not who I am. I know. She touched his arm briefly, contact electric even through his shirt sleeve. That's what terrifies me. Knowing you mean it. She left him standing there, heart hammering against ribs, feeling the last walls of his fortress develop irreparable cracks. Sunday morning brought the visitor Grace had been dreading. Michael answered the doorbell to find a woman in her late 30s,
Designer suit, leather portfolio, smile practiced and cold. Michael Sterling? Yes. Victoria Ashford. I'm an attorney representing David Mitchell's interests. I'm here to discuss custody arrangements for Sophie Mitchell. The world tilted. Michael gripped the doorframe, mind racing. I'm not Sophie's guardian. You want Grace Mitchell. Actually, Mr. Sterling, I'd like to speak with both of you. May I come in? Every instinct screamed refusal, but turning her away would only delay the inevitable. Michael showed her to the formal sitting room, neutral territory, and went to find Grace. She was in the conservatory with Sophie, checking caterpillar progress. One glance at his face, and she knew. He's here, isn't he? David found us. His attorney wants to discuss custody. Michael kept his voice low so Sophie wouldn't overhear. You don't have to talk to her alone. I'll sit in if you want. Grace's hands trembled, but her voice stayed steady. Get Margaret, too. I want witnesses. They assembled in the sitting room like opposing armies. Victoria Ashford arranged papers on the coffee table with meticulous care. Grace sat rigid on the sofa, Michael beside her, Margaret in her wheelchair forming the third point of their triangle. Victoria began without preamble. My client, David Mitchell, has retained my services to pursue shared custody of his daughter, Sophie Elizabeth Mitchell. He's recently remarried, achieved financial stability, and wishes to establish a relationship with his child. Grace's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. He abandoned her 4 years ago, disappeared without a word. Now he wants relationship? People change, Ms. Mitchell. Mr. Mitchell has undergone significant personal growth. He's employed, stable, married to a woman eager to embrace stepmother responsibilities. The court looks favorably on fathers seeking to right past mistakes. The court also looks favorably on mothers who've been the sole caregiver for their child's entire life. Grace's voice could have cut diamonds. What does David really want? Victoria's smile never wavered. Joint custody, alternate weekends, summer vacation split evenly, shared decision-making on education and medical matters. Absolutely not. Ms. Mitchell, I urge you to consider negotiation. Custody battles are expensive, emotionally devastating, and the outcome is never certain. Mr. Mitchell is prepared to be reasonable, but only if you cooperate. Michael felt Grace trembling beside him, fury and anguish warring beneath her skin. He spoke before calculation could stop him. What's the real angle here? 4 years of silence, now sudden parental devotion? That doesn't track. Victoria's gaze turned assessing. And you are? Ms. Mitchell's employer and friend. Someone who's watched her build a stable, loving home for Sophie single-handedly, while David Mitchell did absolutely nothing. A home built on employment that could end tomorrow. Hardly the stability Sophie deserves. Victoria pulled a document from her portfolio. We've done our research, Ms. Mitchell. You work as a housekeeper. You live in employer-provided housing. You're financially dependent on Mr. Sterling's continued goodwill. What happens when he tires of playing benefactor? Where does that leave Sophie? Grace's face went white. Michael's hands clenched into fists, rage flooding through his carefully maintained control. Margaret spoke before he could, voice carrying the authority of 78 years and zero tolerance for nonsense. Young lady, you have 5 seconds to remove yourself from this house before I call security and have you escorted out. Victoria didn't flinch. I'm simply presenting facts the court will consider. Ms. Mitchell's housing situation is precarious. Her income is tied entirely to one employer. She has no family support, no safety net. David Mitchell offers stability, a house he owns, a wife with independent income, an extended family eager to embrace Sophie. Get out. Michael stood, voice arctic. Now. Mr. Sterling, threats won't... That wasn't a threat. It was an instruction. You have 30 seconds to leave before I have you removed for trespassing. Victoria gathered her papers with deliberate slowness.
We'll be filing custody paperwork within the week. Miss Mitchell, I suggest you retain counsel. This will proceed with or without your cooperation. She left, heels clicking on marble, the sound of her departure like gunshots. Grace sat frozen, eyes wide and glassy. Margaret wheeled closer, gripping her hand. Breathe, dear. Just breathe. He's going to take her. Grace's voice broke. He abandoned us. And now he's going to take her because I'm just a housekeeper with no stability and no— Stop. Michael crouched before her, forcing eye contact. That woman was trying to scare you into settling. Don't let her. But she's right. I have nothing. I am nothing. Any judge will see a mother who sacrificed everything for her child, who works hard, who created stability from nothing, who loves Sophie more than her own life. He gripped her shoulders. You're not nothing, Grace. You're everything that matters. Tears spilled over, tracking down her cheeks. I can't afford a lawyer. I can't fight him. Yes, you can, because you're not fighting alone. She shook her head, pulling away. I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. My lawyers, my resources, whatever you need to protect Sophie. Why? The question emerged raw. Why would you do this for me? Michael felt the words rise from somewhere deep and true, the place he'd kept frozen for 3 years. Because you matter. Because Sophie matters. Because this family, he gestured at the 3 of them, matters more than anything else in my life right now. Grace dissolved into sobs, and Michael did the only thing that made sense. Pulled her into his arms and held her while she shattered. Margaret wheeled closer, forming a circle of protection around Grace's breaking. When the storm finally passed, Grace lifted her head. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for bringing this to your door. Enough apologizing. Margaret's voice carried steel. We fight. Together. Sterling resources against one deadbeat father? This is hardly a fair contest. Michael pulled his phone from his pocket. I'm calling my attorney. Best family law specialist in New York. She'll have this dismissed before it reaches a courtroom. Michael, I can't let you. You can. You will. He met her eyes. Partners, remember? Partners have each other's backs. Grace nodded, exhausted. Partners. He stepped into the hallway to make the call. His attorney, Jennifer Blake, sharp, ruthless, with a perfect record in family court, answered on the second ring. Michael, this is a Sunday surprise? I need family law representation. Custody case. Attempted intimidation. The full warfare treatment. Jennifer's interest sharpened audibly. For you? For my— He paused, searching for the right word. Employee? Friend? The woman who'd become essential to his existence. For someone I care about deeply. Her ex-husband abandoned their daughter 4 years ago. Now he's trying to take her using scare tactics and financial pressure. I assume you're funding the defense? Whatever it costs, I want him crushed legally and completely. Noted. Send me everything. Custody history, financial records, the attorney's name. I'll have a response drafted by tomorrow morning. Michael ended the call, returned to find Grace composed, but hollow-eyed. Sophie's voice drifted from the conservatory, singing to caterpillars who were beginning to form chrysalises. She can't know, Grace whispered. Not yet. Not until we know what's happening. Agreed. Michael sat beside her. Jennifer Blake is the best. If there's a weakness in David's case, she'll find it and exploit it mercilessly. And if there isn't, then we build your case until it's unassailable. Employment contract, housing stability, character witnesses, Sophie's well-being documentation. Whatever it takes. Margaret cleared her throat. I believe I can help with that. Character witnesses, I mean. I know several family court judges. Socially, of course. But judges are human. They remember who writes generous checks to their favorite charities. Grace's laugh was watery but genuine. Are you suggesting we bribe judges? Absolutely not. I'm suggesting we remind them that Sophie Mitchell has a great-grandmother who happens to be Margaret Sterling, and the Sterling family takes care of its own. But I'm not. You are, Margaret interrupted. As of this moment, your family. We'll make it official if needed. Adoption, legal guardianship, whatever mechanism makes you untouchable. Michael's mind raced ahead, seeing the strategy. Margaret's right. If we formalize your position here, not just employee but family, David loses his financial argument entirely. You do that? Put your name on legal documents saying I'm family? Without hesitation. Grace stared at him, something shifting in her expression. Understanding bloomed alongside hope, fragile but growing. The rest of Sunday passed in strategic planning. Jennifer Blake arrived in person that evening, portfolio full of forms and questions. She interviewed Grace for 2 hours, documenting 4 years of single parenthood, David's abandonment, Sophie's thriving under Grace's care. When she left, Jennifer pulled Michael aside. This case is weaker than Victoria Ashford made it sound. 4 years of absence. 0 child support, no documented attempts at contact? David Mitchell's new stability doesn't erase that history. We'll win, but it'll be messy. How messy? Character assassination, financial scrutiny, everything about Grace's life examined under microscope. She needs to be prepared for that. They'll try to paint her as unstable, you as inappropriate, the living arrangement as improper. Michael looked toward the sitting room where Grace sat with Margaret, both exhausted. She's stronger than people think. She'll need to be. Jennifer's expression softened. Michael, I have to ask, what is she to you? Because if this is just employer helping employee, say so now. But if it's more than that, we need to be strategic about optics. The question deserved consideration. What was Grace to him? The woman who'd restarted his father's clock? Who'd turned his trap into art? Who'd brought laughter back to rooms that had forgotten sound? I don't know yet, he admitted. But I know I'm not losing her. Or Sophie. Jennifer smiled. Then we fight to win. I'll file our response tomorrow. Monday morning arrived with false normalcy. Grace helped Margaret through morning routines, made breakfast, got Sophie ready for school, but tension radiated from her like heat, invisible but palpable. Michael watched from the doorway as Grace braided Sophie's hair, fingers working with automatic precision while her mind clearly churned elsewhere. Mama, you're pulling too tight, Sophie complained. Sorry, baby. Grace loosened her grip, started over. Better? Much better. Are you okay? You seem sad. Just tired, sweetheart. Didn't sleep well. Sophie turned, studying her mother with those 2 perceptive eyes. Is it because of the lady who came yesterday? The mean one who made you cry? Grace's hands stilled. You heard that? I heard yelling. Then you were crying after. I don't like when you're sad. Michael's chest constricted. Sophie had been aware the whole time, processing adult drama with a child's limited understanding but infinite emotional intelligence. Grace pulled Sophie into a fierce hug. I'm okay, I promise. Sometimes grown-ups have to deal with complicated things, but it's going to be fine. Because Uncle Mike is helping? Yes, because Uncle Mike is helping. Sophie nodded, satisfied, and returned to her breakfast. But Michael caught Grace's eyes over the girl's head, saw the terror she was hiding beneath forced optimism. After Sophie left for school, Grace found Michael in his study. She closed the door, leaned against it, and finally let the mask drop. I'm falling apart, she whispered. I keep thinking about court, about some judge deciding if I'm good enough, if my love is enough. What if it's not? What if they look at David's house and his wife and his stability and decide Sophie's better off there? Michael stood, crossed to her. Then they'd be wrong. Provably, demonstrably wrong. But what if wrong doesn't matter?
What if the system values houses over hearts? He had no answer to that, no reassurance that wouldn't ring hollow, so instead he took her hand, lacing their fingers together. We'll fight, Grace. However long it takes, whatever it costs. You're not alone in this. I'm scared of getting used to that. To not being alone. Because what happens when— No. He cupped her face gently, forcing her to meet his eyes. No what-ifs. No catastrophizing. Right now, in this moment, you have me. You have Margaret. You have an entire legal team. Focus on that. She leaned into his touch, and he felt something fundamental shift between them. Not just employer and employee anymore. Not even just friends. Something deeper, more dangerous, infinitely more precious. The moment shattered when his phone buzzed. Jennifer Blake, with updates. Answer it, Grace said, pulling back. I'll be okay. Michael took the call, listening as Jennifer outlined their strategy. File the motion to dismiss, gather character witnesses, document Sophie's stability and happiness. Build an unassailable case that David's 4-year absence disqualified him from claiming parental rights. There's one more thing, Jennifer said carefully. Victoria Ashford is expensive. Very expensive. David Mitchell's salary as a middle manager at a logistics company wouldn't cover her retainer, let alone a protracted custody battle. Someone's funding this. Ice flooded Michael's veins. Who? I'm investigating. But Michael, if someone with resources is backing this play, we need to know why, and we need to be ready for whatever comes next. Michael ended the call, mind racing through possibilities. Who would fund a custody battle against Grace? And why? Wednesday brought the answer, delivered via certified letter. Michael signed for it, carried it to his study, and felt his blood freeze as he read. The letter was from Victoria Ashford's firm, but the language was different, more aggressive, more threatening. It detailed Grace's unstable employment history, her questionable living arrangements, her inappropriate relationship with her employer. Then came the accusation that made his vision narrow. Allegations that Michael's interest in Grace was predatory in nature, that he'd exploited her vulnerable position, that the entire arrangement was unsuitable for a young child. They were painting him as the villain, Grace as his victim, Sophie as endangered by proximity to both. Margaret found him staring at the letter, knuckles white. What is it? He handed her the document, watched her face harden as she read. This is obscene, she said quietly. They're trying to destroy both of you. They're trying to scare Grace into giving up Sophie to make the allegations go away. Will it work? Michael thought of Grace's exhaustion, her bone-deep fear of losing her daughter. No, but it'll hurt her, and I need to tell her before Victoria does. He found Grace in the conservatory checking on the caterpillars. 3 had already formed chrysalises, 2 still munched milkweed, oblivious to transformation's approach. Grace. She turned, saw his expression, went still. What happened? He handed her the letter, watched color drain from her face as she read. When she finished, her hands were shaking so badly the paper rattled.
They're saying that you're—
She couldn't finish the sentence. I know. It's a tactic. They want you scared enough to settle.
It's working.
Her voice broke.
Michael, if they're questioning your character because of me, if they're making it seem like you took advantage—
Then they're lying. And Jennifer will prove it. But what if the damage is done before she can? What if people believe? Let them believe what they want. The truth is all that matters in court. Grace shook her head, tears streaming. You don't understand. You have a reputation to protect. Sterling Enterprises, your business relationships, everything you've built. I can't be the reason that crumbles. You won't be. You don't know that. Her voice rose, desperate. Michael, maybe I should just settle. Give David some custody. Make this go away before it destroys you. No.
The word came out harder than he intended. Grace, no. You don't negotiate with terrorists. And that's what Victoria Ashford is. A legal terrorist trying to scare you into surrender. But Sophie deserves a mother who fights for her, who doesn't teach her that bullies win if you're scared enough. He gripped her shoulders. You're stronger than this. I know you are. I'm not. She pulled away, wrapping her arms around herself. I'm barely holding on, Michael. I'm terrified every second of every day. What if I make the wrong choice? What if fighting makes it worse? What if... Grace. Margaret's voice cut through the spiral. She'd wheeled into the conservatory silently. Come sit with me. Grace obeyed, sinking onto the bench beside Margaret's wheelchair. The older woman took her hand, grip firm despite arthritis. I'm going to tell you something I've never told Michael, Margaret began. When my Henry died, I wanted to die too. 15 years together, and suddenly I was alone in this massive house with a grieving grandson to raise and no idea how to keep breathing without my other half. Grace's tears slowed, attention caught. I was terrified. Every decision felt impossible. Every day felt like drowning. And I had well-meaning friends who said I should sell the house, move somewhere smaller, let Michael go to boarding school where professionals could handle his grief. Margaret's eyes hardened. They said I wasn't stable enough, that I was too old, too fragile, too broken to raise a child. What did you do? Grace whispered. I told them to go to hell. Then I raised Michael anyway. Was I perfect? No. Did I make mistakes? Constantly. But I fought for what mattered, and what mattered was that boy. Just like what matters now is Sophie. Grace's breathing steadied, focus sharpening. Margaret continued, voice gentler now. You're allowed to be terrified, dear. Terror doesn't make you weak. But giving up when you're terrified? That teaches Sophie that fear wins, that she should surrender whenever life gets hard. Is that the lesson you want her to learn? No. Then we fight. Messily, imperfectly, scared out of our minds. We fight anyway. Grace nodded, squaring her shoulders. Okay. We fight. Michael exhaled relief. Jennifer wants to move fast. She'll file a response addressing these allegations directly. Character witnesses, employment documentation, everything that proves this is a stable home. Who would testify for me? Grace asked. I don't have anyone. You have me, Margaret said immediately. And me, Michael added. Sophie's teacher, her pediatrician, the headmistress at her school. Margaret ticked off names. My friends on the hospital board who've met you at events. The staff here who've watched you work. Grace, you have more people than you realize. Over the next 3 days, Jennifer Blake assembled a case file that read like a love letter to competent motherhood. Mrs. Peterson testified that Sophie was the happiest, most well-adjusted child in her class. Dr. Ramirez, Sophie's pediatrician, documented consistent care and attention to the girl's health needs. The headmistress at Little Scholars Academy wrote a glowing letter about Grace's involvement despite her work schedule. Michael's head of household staff, Mrs. Henderson, who'd worked for Sterling Manor for 20 years, submitted a statement praising Grace's professionalism and the positive changes she'd brought to the household. 3 neighbors from Grace's old Queens apartment building wrote letters describing her as a devoted mother who'd sacrificed everything for her daughter. But the most powerful testimony came from Margaret. Thursday afternoon, she summoned Michael to her room. She sat at her writing desk, fountain pen in hand, stationery embossed with the Sterling family crest. I'm writing my statement, she said without preamble. Jennifer says it needs to be typed, but this deserves handwriting first. May I read it? She handed him 3 pages of her elegant script. Michael read, throat tightening with each paragraph. Margaret wrote about watching Grace transform Sterling Manor from a mausoleum into a home, about Sophie's laughter bringing joy to rooms that had known only silence, about witnessing love in its purest form, a mother's dedication to her child's happiness above all else. Then came the final paragraph, and Michael's vision blurred. In my 78 years, I have known wealth, privilege, and social standing. I have also known loss, loneliness, and the particular despair of facing mortality without purpose. Grace Mitchell gave me back purpose. She and her daughter reminded me why living matters. If Sophie is taken from Grace, it will break more than a mother's heart. It will break a family that has only just learned to love again. I implore the court to see what I see, not an unstable employment situation, but a home. Not financial dependency, but mutual care. Not inappropriate relationships, but the foundation of something worth protecting. Grace Mitchell is not just Sophie's mother. She is family. And family is everything. Michael set the pages down carefully. Grandmother, this is true. Every word. Margaret capped her pen. Now that Jennifer turned it into whatever legal language the court requires. But I wanted you to see it first. To understand that this fight isn't just yours or Grace's. It's mine, too. Friday brought Victoria Ashford's official filing. Jennifer forwarded it with a succinct message. Weak case, weaker arguments. They're hoping you'll settle out of fear. Don't. Michael read through the document anyway, fury building with each paragraph. David Mitchell painted himself as reformed father, stable provider, victim of youthful mistakes he'd now corrected. He claimed Grace's lifestyle was unstable, her dependence on employer largesse, a form of financial precarity that endangered Sophie. The filing requested immediate temporary custody pending full hearing, claiming emergency circumstances warranted swift action.
They're trying to take her now, Grace whispered, reading over his shoulder, before we can fight back properly.
Jennifer's already drafting the emergency response. Michael's voice was cold steel. They won't get within a mile of Sophie before a judge reviews the facts. That night, Michael found himself unable to sleep. He wandered to the conservatory, seeking solace among the plants and glass. Found Grace there already, sitting in darkness, watching caterpillars who'd sealed themselves into chrysalises.
Couldn't sleep either? He asked softly.
She shook her head. Keep thinking about court, about some judge deciding if I'm good enough, if my love is enough. What if it's not? What if they look at David's house and his wife and his stability and decide Sophie's better off there? Michael sat beside her on the bench. Then they'd be wrong. Provably, demonstrably wrong.
But what if wrong doesn't matter? What if the system values houses over hearts?
He had no answer to that. No reassurance that wouldn't ring hollow. So instead, he took her hand, lacing their fingers together in the darkness. We'll fight, Grace. However long it takes, whatever it costs. You're not alone in this. She leaned against his shoulder, and he felt her tears soak through his shirt. They sat that way for an hour, watching caterpillars dream their way toward wings, hoping transformation was possible for creatures more complicated than insects. When Grace finally fell asleep, head on his shoulder, Michael stayed still. He memorized the weight of her, the trust implicit in her rest. This woman who'd broken through his walls without trying, who'd reminded him that hearts could survive shattering and still learn to beat again. He thought about David Mitchell, trying to reclaim what he'd discarded, about Victoria Ashford and her cold calculations, about a system that measured worth in houses and income rather than love and sacrifice. And he thought about Sophie, sleeping peacefully upstairs, unaware that her world teetered on the edge of devastation. Margaret found them at dawn, still sitting together in the conservatory. She took in the scene, Grace asleep against Michael's shoulder, their joined hands, his protective curve around her, and smiled. About time you stopped pretending, she murmured. Michael met his grandmother's eyes. I'm terrified. Good. Terror means it matters. Now the question is whether you're brave enough to fight for it. Grace stirred, lifting her head. What time is it? 6:30, Margaret supplied. Sophie will be up soon. You should probably compose yourself before she sees you like this. Grace pulled away from Michael, suddenly conscious of how they'd spent the night. I need to breathe, Michael instructed gently. Then have coffee. Then we face the day. Together. She nodded, and they moved to the kitchen, falling into morning routine. Grace started coffee, Michael retrieved the newspaper, Margaret wheeled herself to her usual spot. When Sophie appeared, sleep-rumpled and cheerful, they presented a united front of normalcy. The caterpillars are in their chrysalises, Sophie announced. Soon they'll be butterflies. Soon, Grace agreed, voice steadier than her hands. Transformation takes time, baby, but it's worth the wait. Sophie accepted this wisdom, already moving on to demands for pancakes. Michael watched Grace cook, noting the tremor in her movements that only someone paying close attention would catch. He was paying attention. He'd been paying attention since the moment she'd arranged cash into a heart, and he couldn't seem to stop. Jennifer Blake called at 9 with updates. The custody filing would hit the court system by noon. Her response would be filed simultaneously, aggressive and comprehensive. The emergency hearing was scheduled for Tuesday, 4 days to prepare. 4 days, Grace repeated when Michael relayed the information. 4 days until someone decides if I'm good enough. 4 days until we prove what everyone who knows you already understands, Michael corrected, that you're an extraordinary mother. The weekend passed in a blur of preparation. Jennifer visited Saturday, drilling Grace on potential questions. What was her daily routine with Sophie? How did she handle discipline? What were Sophie's favorite activities, her fears, her strengths? Grace answered each question with a detailed knowledge of someone who'd been present for every moment of her daughter's life. Jennifer took notes, nodding with satisfaction. Sunday, they practiced courtroom demeanor. How to sit, how to address the judge, how to stay composed when Victoria Ashford attacked. She'll try to make you angry, Jennifer warned. She'll imply you're a bad mother, that you're using Michael, that Sophie would be better off with David. Don't take the bait. Stay calm. Stay factual. Let the evidence speak. Grace practiced, but Michael saw the toll it took. By Sunday evening, she was drawn and pale, running on adrenaline and determination. He found her in Sophie's room after the girl had fallen asleep. Grace sat on the edge of the bed, stroking her daughter's hair with infinite gentleness. She's so peaceful, Grace whispered. She has no idea tomorrow might change everything. Tomorrow won't change anything, Michael said from the doorway. Sophie will still be your daughter. You'll still be her mother. A courtroom can't alter that. A courtroom can take her away from me. No, it can't. Not when the truth is on your side. Grace looked up, eyes glistening. How are you so certain? Because I've watched you with her. I've seen the way you anticipate her needs before she voices them. The way you turn every moment into a teaching opportunity without making it feel like a lesson. The way you love her with your whole heart, not because it's easy, but because she's yours. He crossed to where she sat. No judge in their right mind would separate you. What if they're not in their right mind? What if they see a housekeeper in employer housing and decide that's not stable enough? Then we appeal. We fight at every level until someone with sense prevails. He knelt beside the bed. Grace, I need you to hear this. Whatever happens tomorrow, you are not losing Sophie, and you are not losing me. We're in this together, all the way through. She touched his face, fingers trembling. You keep saving me. You saved yourself. I'm just along for the ride. That's not true. Without you, I'd still be alone in this house, slowly turning to stone. He caught her hand, pressed it to his chest. You brought me back to life, Grace. Let me help you fight for yours. She leaned forward, rested her forehead against his. They stayed that way, breathing in sync, drawing strength from proximity. Tuesday morning arrived too quickly. Grace dressed in the navy suit Jennifer had insisted she buy, projecting stability and respectability.
Margaret wore her pearls and her most intimidating expression.
Michael chose the charcoal suit he wore to board meetings, armor in the form of Italian wool. Sophie stayed behind with Mrs. Henderson, told only that Mama had an important meeting and would be home for dinner. Grace had kissed her goodbye 3 times, memorizing the feel of her daughter's arms around her neck. The courthouse was downtown Manhattan, all marble and security checkpoints, and the particular smell of institutional anxiety. Jennifer Blake met them in the hallway outside Family Court. Part 12. Briefcase in hand, expression confident. "Remember," she instructed Grace, "answer only the questions asked. Don't volunteer information. Don't let Victoria bait you into anger. You're calm, competent, and clearly the best parent for Sophie." Grace nodded, face pale but composed. They entered the courtroom. David Mitchell sat at the opposing table with Victoria Ashford. Michael felt his hands clench into fists. David looked different, older, softer around the middle, wearing a suit that didn't quite fit. He didn't meet Grace's eyes. Judge Patricia Morrison presided, 60-something, gray hair, reading glasses perched on her nose, expression giving nothing away. She reviewed the filings with meticulous attention while everyone waited in tense silence. Finally, she looked up. "This is an emergency hearing on Mr. Mitchell's petition for immediate temporary custody. Mrs. Blake, your opposition argues this is not an emergency. Make your case." Jennifer stood, transforming into the legal weapon Michael had hired her to be. "Your Honor, there is no emergency. Sophie Mitchell is 6 years old. She's been in her mother's sole custody since birth. For 4 years, from age 2 to 6, Mr. Mitchell had 0 contact with his daughter, 0 financial support, 0 attempts to establish a relationship. He abandoned his family, Your Honor, completely and deliberately." Victoria rose. "Your Honor, my client acknowledges past mistakes, but he's made significant changes. He's remarried, achieved financial stability, and wants to correct his absence. That's not abandonment continuing. That's redemption." Judge Morrison's expression remained neutral. "Ms. Mitchell, you're represented?" Grace stood. "Yes, Your Honor, Jennifer Blake." "And Mr. Sterling?" The judge's gaze turned to Michael. "You're here because—" "I employ Mrs. Mitchell, Your Honor. She and her daughter reside at my home as part of her compensation package." "I see." The judge made a note. "Ms. Ashford, your filing suggests this living arrangement is inappropriate. Elaborate." Victoria stood, smile sharp. "Your Honor, Ms. Mitchell works as a housekeeper. She lives in her employer's home with no independent housing. Her income is entirely dependent on Mr. Sterling's continued goodwill. This creates a precarious situation for a young child. What happens when Mr. Sterling tires of this arrangement? Where does Sophie go?" "Ms. Blake?" Judge Morrison prompted. Jennifer stood smoothly. "Your Honor, Ms. Mitchell has stable employment with a written contract, health insurance, and appropriate housing. The fact that her compensation includes housing doesn't make it precarious. It makes it generous. Many live-in positions include housing. That's standard practice, not instability." "But the relationship between Mr. Sterling and Mrs. Mitchell," Victoria began, "is professional," Jennifer cut in. "Ms. Mitchell provides household management and care for Mr. Sterling's grandmother. There's nothing inappropriate about that arrangement." Judge Morrison turned to Margaret. "Mrs. Sterling, you're the grandmother mentioned?" Margaret's voice carried clear and firm. "I am, Your Honor." "And your assessment of Ms. Mitchell's care?" "Exemplary. She's professional, competent, and has brought immeasurable improvement to my quality of life." "And her daughter, Sophie?" Margaret's smile was genuine. "That child is a blessing. Bright, kind, well-mannered. Ms. Mitchell is raising her beautifully." Judge Morrison made more notes. Then she addressed David directly. "Mr. Mitchell, you haven't seen your daughter in 4 years?" David stood, looking uncomfortable. "No, Your Honor, I made a mistake. I was young, overwhelmed. I left when I shouldn't have." "Why now? Why seek custody after 4 years of absence?" David hesitated. Michael saw something flicker in his expression. Uncertainty, maybe regret. Because I've changed, Your Honor. I'm stable now. I want to be Sophie's father. But you haven't been, the judge said bluntly. For 4 years, Ms. Mitchell has been both mother and father. She's fed, clothed, educated, and loved this child alone. Now you want to disrupt that because you've decided you're ready? Mr. Mitchell, parenting isn't about your readiness. It's about the child's needs. Victoria jumped in. Your Honor, Sophie deserves to know her father. Mr. Mitchell has rights. Rights that he abandoned, Judge Morrison interrupted. 4 years, Miss Ashford. No contact, no support. In my courtroom, that's not a temporary lapse. That's abandonment. Michael felt hope flare, dangerous and bright. The judge continued. I'm denying the emergency petition for temporary custody. There is no emergency here. Sophie is safe, stable, and thriving in her mother's care. Grace's breath came out in a sob. Michael gripped her hand under the table. However, Judge Morrison added, and the hope dimmed slightly, Mr. Mitchell's desire to establish a relationship isn't without some merit, however poorly timed. I'm ordering a custody evaluation. Court-appointed psychologist will interview both parents, observe interactions with Sophie, and assess the home environments. We'll reconvene in 6 weeks for a full hearing based on that evaluation. Jennifer stood. Your Honor, respectfully, a custody evaluation subjects this child to unnecessary scrutiny. Ms. Mitchell has been the sole parent for Sophie's entire life. There's no evidence of unfitness, neglect, or harm. I'm aware, Ms. Blake, but Mr. Mitchell has parental rights, however poorly he's exercised them. The evaluation will determine what arrangement, if any, serves Sophie's best interests. Judge Morrison's gavel came down. 6-week court-appointed evaluator will contact both parties within 3 days. The gavel's sound felt like a door closing. Not victory, not defeat, just yen shu. 6 more weeks of uncertainty. They left the courtroom in silence. In the hallway, Victoria Ashford approached with her conciliatory smile. Ms. Mitchell, my client is willing to settle. Reasonable visitation, no custody changes. We can make this go away without the evaluation. Grace's voice was steady as stone. No. The evaluation will be invasive. They'll question everything. Are you prepared for that scrutiny? I'm prepared to fight for my daughter. Tell David if he wants to see Sophie, he can prove he deserves it in court. Until then, stay away from my family. Victoria's smile frosted. See you at the evaluation, then. She left. David lingered, looking lost. Grace, he started. I know I don't deserve. You're right. You don't. Grace's voice could have cut glass. You walked away when she needed you most. You don't get to walk back in because it's convenient now. I made mistakes. Mistakes are forgetting to pay a bill or missing a birthday. What you did was abandonment. You chose to leave. You chose to disappear. Those weren't mistakes, David. Those were decisions. David flinched. I want to know her. I want to be her father. Then you should have stayed 4 years ago. Grace turned away. Come on, Michael. Let's go home. They walked out together. Grace, Michael, Margaret, Jennifer. A unit forged in shared purpose. Behind them, David Mitchell stood alone in the courthouse hallway, understanding too late what he'd thrown away. In the car, Grace finally broke. She folded over, hands covering her face, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Margaret reached from her wheelchair to grip Grace's shoulder. Michael drove, giving her space to shatter, ready to help collect the pieces when she was ready. By the time they reached Sterling Manor, Grace had composed herself. Sophie ran to meet them at the door, eyes wide with hope and fear. What happened? Are you still my mama? Grace dropped to her knees, pulling Sophie into a fierce embrace. Always, baby. Forever and always. Nothing changes that. The judge said so? The judge said we have to talk to some people, answer some questions. But yes, I'm still your mama, and you're still my daughter, and nothing in this world can change that.
Sophie relaxed into the hug.
Okay, can we check on the butterflies now?
The easy shift back to childhood concerns nearly broke Michael's composure. This was what they were fighting for, Sophie's right to be a child, to worry about butterflies instead of custody battles.
Go ahead, sweetheart, Grace said, releasing her. I'll be right there.
Sophie ran off. Grace stood, swaying slightly. Michael caught her elbow.
6 weeks, she whispered.
6 weeks of someone scrutinizing every choice I've made.
6 weeks of proving what everyone who knows you already understands, Margaret corrected. That you're an extraordinary mother. The following week brought Dr. Sarah Chen, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and penetrating questions. She observed Sophie at school, interviewed Mrs. Peterson and Dr. Ramirez, visited Sterling Manor 3 times.
She spent hours with Grace, asking about parenting philosophy, daily routines, how she handled discipline and celebrated achievements. She spent equal time with David, touring his new house in New Jersey, meeting his wife Amanda, and she spent considerable time with Sophie, playing games and reading books and asking careful questions about who she loved, who made her feel safe, where she called home. Through it all, Grace held herself together with visible effort. Michael watched her wake each morning and choose courage, watched her answer invasive questions with dignity, watched her prove through sheer determination that love could overcome any evaluation. By week 4, Sophie began asking questions. Why did the nice doctor keep visiting? Grace sat her down one evening in the library, Michael and Margaret present for support.
Baby, you know how you're learning about metamorphosis? How caterpillars change into butterflies? Sophie nodded solemnly.
Sometimes families change too. Your father, he wants to see you again, to spend time with you.
The man in the picture? The one who left when I was little? Grace's voice stayed steady.
Yes, him. And the judge wants to make sure that whatever happens, you're happy and safe. That's why Dr. Chen keeps asking questions. Sophie considered this seriously.
Will I have to leave you, Mama? No, baby. You'll always be my daughter. Always.
What about Uncle Mike and Grandma Margaret?
Michael's chest constricted. Sophie was asking if she'd lose her entire found family. We're not going anywhere, Margaret said firmly. No matter what happens, we're your family. Promise? Promise, Michael confirmed, and meant it with every fiber of his being. Sophie relaxed, satisfied. Okay then. I'm not scared if you're all here. Her simple trust nearly broke Grace's composure.
After Sophie went to bed, Grace found Michael in his study.
She's not scared because she doesn't understand what's at stake, Grace said, voice hollow. She thinks promises matter, that love protects.
Maybe it does, Michael replied. And we're all here, Grace. Whatever the evaluation determines, you're not facing it alone.
Week 6 arrived with autumn turning toward winter. The butterflies had long since emerged and been released.
Sophie missed them but understood. Transformation required letting go. The final evaluation report arrived on a Tuesday. Dr. Chen delivered it to both attorneys simultaneously. Jennifer called Michael immediately.
It's good, she said without preamble. Really good. Sophie is thriving with Grace. The report documents exceptional mother-child attachment, appropriate discipline, stellar educational support.
David's sections note his improved stability, but highlight Sophie's complete lack of connection to him. The recommendation is, she paused, that primary custody remain with Grace, with David granted supervised visitation to establish a relationship before considering anything further. Michael's relief was so intense it left him dizzy. Grace keeps Sophie. Grace keeps Sophie. The final hearing is next week, but with this evaluation, Victoria has no case.
We won, Michael.
He found Grace in the conservatory, tending the plants. She looked up, saw his expression, and her knees buckled. He caught her. We won. Dr. Chen's report recommends you keep primary custody. Sophie stays with you. Grace's sob was wrenching. Joy and relief and 6 weeks of terror finally releasing. She clung to him, shaking, and Michael held her while she broke apart and reformed.
She's safe, Grace whispered. My baby's safe.
She always was. But now the court agrees. Margaret found them there, and her smile was triumphant.
I knew it. I knew they'd see the truth.
The final hearing was anticlimactic. Judge Morrison reviewed Dr. Chen's report, asked a few clarifying questions, and delivered her ruling from the bench. Primary physical and legal custody to Ms. Mitchell. Mr. Mitchell is granted supervised visitation every other Saturday, 4 hours. Supervision to be provided by a court-approved monitor. After 6 months of consistent visitation, we'll revisit the possibility of unsupervised time. Grace stood as the judge spoke, back straight, shoulders squared. Vindication, recognition. The system finally seeing what everyone who loved her had known all along. David looked defeated. Amanda, present for the first time, looked confused, like she was waking from a dream to find reality far different than expected. Outside the courthouse, Victoria Ashford approached one final time.
My clients would like to discuss the visitation terms. No, Grace interrupted. The judge ruled. If David wants a relationship with Sophie, he can show up for those supervised visits. But I'm done negotiating. Victoria nodded, professional mask slipping to show resignation. Understood. For what it's worth, Miss Mitchell, you're a good mother. The unexpected kindness surprised them both. Victoria walked away, and Grace turned to Michael. It's over. It's really over.
Not over, Margaret corrected.
Beginning. Now you get to stop being afraid and start actually living.
That night, Sterling Manor celebrated. Mrs. Henderson prepared a feast. They ate in the dining room, all 4 of them, plus Jennifer, who'd been invited to share in the victory. Sophie dominated conversation, oblivious to what they'd been fighting for, simply happy that the nice doctor wasn't coming anymore. After Sophie went to bed, the adults remained in the living room. Jennifer departed with warm farewell. Margaret excused herself, wearing a knowing smile, which left Michael and Grace alone, firelight painting shadows on walls. I can't believe it's over, Grace said, curled in the corner of the sofa. How does it feel? Terrifying? She laughed at his expression. I've been in crisis mode so long, I don't know how to just be. You'll learn, one day at a time. Grace studied him, something shifting in her expression. You remember what you said 6 weeks ago? Michael's heart rate picked up. I remember. And what I said? After. Ask after. It's after now. Her voice was soft but certain. So ask. He crossed to the sofa, knelt before her. Grace Mitchell, I love you. I love your daughter. I love the life you've built here, the family we've become. He took her hands. Will you let me try to be your partner, Sophie's family, to build something real with you? That's not quite the question I was expecting, Grace said, eyes bright. What were you expecting? More traditional, she smiled. But I like yours better. It's honest. Is that a yes? It's a, let's try. She pulled him up to sit beside her. I love you too, Michael. But I'm still scared. Those are reasonable fears. So we try, carefully. We see if this thing between us can survive without crisis. She paused. We make sure Sophie's comfortable with changes. He kissed her, cutting off the planning. She melted into it, and for a moment, they were just 2 people choosing each other despite every reason to be afraid. When they broke apart, Grace was smiling. Future. I like the sound of that. They sat together, watching fire burn down to embers. Outside, winter approached.
Inside, something new was beginning.
6 months later, spring arrived with warmth that made winter feel like a bad dream. The manor's gardens exploded with color, tulips and daffodils and roses testing the season. Grace stood in the conservatory wearing a simple white dress, tea-length, with lace sleeves, flowers woven through her braided hair. She looked like spring personified. They'd kept the wedding tiny, just 40 guests in the south garden. Margaret sat in the front row, radiant. Sophie stood beside Grace as flower girl, having taken her duties with utmost seriousness. Judge Morrison herself had agreed to officiate, a gesture Grace found both touching and surreal. "Dearly beloved," Judge Morrison began. The ceremony was brief. When it was Grace's turn, her voice carried clear and strong. "Michael, you taught me that walls come down brick by brick. You showed me that love isn't about grand gestures, but consistent action. You gave Sophie and me not just a home, but a family. I promise to honor that gift every day." Michael's vows stuck briefly, emotion overwhelming preparation, but he pushed through. "Grace, the day you walked into this house, you brought light I didn't know I was missing. You took my trap and turned it into art. You showed me courage. You brought Sophie into my life, and I am more grateful for that than I have words to express. I promise to protect you both, to choose you both, to keep learning how to love even when it terrifies me." Judge Morrison pronounced them married. Michael kissed his wife and heard Sophie's delighted squeal, Margaret's warm laughter, the applause of people who'd supported them through darkness. The reception flowed into evening. Tables in the garden, lights through trees, music ranging from classical to Sophie's favorite pop songs. Later, as sunset painted the garden gold, Margaret summoned Michael and Grace to the conservatory. "I have something for you both." She produced an envelope. "Open it." Inside was a deed transfer. Sterling Manor transferred to Michael Sterling and Grace Mitchell Sterling, joint ownership. "Grandmother, you can't." "I can, and I have. This house became a home again because of Grace, because of Sophie. It should belong to the family that breathes life into it." Margaret's eyes were damp. "I expect to haunt these halls for at least another decade. But when I do go, I'll go knowing the house is in good hands." Grace was crying. Michael felt his own eyes burn. They knelt beside Margaret's wheelchair, and she pulled them both into a fierce hug. "My family," she whispered. "Thank you for letting an old woman be part of this." "You're not part of it," Grace said. "You're the foundation." That night, after Sophie was asleep and Margaret had retired, Michael found Grace on the balcony outside their room. She changed into comfortable clothes, hair down, makeup washed away. She looked softer, more real, infinitely more precious. "Mrs. Sterling?" he said, testing the name. "I'm keeping Mitchell professionally," she reminded him, "but accurate." She turned, leaning against the rail. "Is this real? Sometimes I'm afraid I'll wake up." "It's real. Dreams don't include custody battles. Dreams are easy. This was hard, which means it's real." Grace smiled, kissed him softly. "Good answer." They stood together overlooking the gardens, the manor spread below them like a promise kept. 1 year later, Grace stood in the conservatory again, but this time she wasn't alone. Michael stood behind her, arms wrapped around her growing middle, 6 months pregnant. Sophie perched on a stool beside them, carefully logging butterfly observations in a notebook. At 7, she'd decided to become a lepidopterist. "Mama, when the baby comes, can we name it Monarch?" Sophie asked, utterly serious. Grace laughed. "Absolutely not." "But it would be educational." "It would be cruel." Michael kissed Grace's temple. "Though I admit, Monarch Sterling has a certain ring to it." "Don't encourage her." Margaret wheeled in, stronger now. "The baby can be called whatever you want, as long as I'm around to spoil them." "You're not going anywhere, Grandma Margaret," Sophie said with certainty. "You promised to teach me to bake."
And I keep my promises, darling girl. Grace's phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Henderson. Sunday dinner ready in 20 minutes. Dinner's ready, Grace announced. Come on, family, let's eat. They moved toward the dining room, chattering and laughing. As they left, one of the chrysalises began to split, a new butterfly emerging into a world that had prepared space for its transformation. The manor that had once been a museum of grief had become a home of joy. The man who'd built walls to survive had learned to take them down to live. The woman who'd arrived scared and desperate had claimed her place as the heart that kept them all beating. And the little girl who'd watched caterpillars transform had learned the most important lesson, that becoming who you're meant to be requires patience, courage, and people who love you enough to watch you change. In the dining room, they gathered around the table, 4 chairs occupied, 1 high chair waiting. A family built from choice, from risk, from the brave decision to hope. Michael raised his glass. To metamorphosis, to second chances, to the family we chose and the love that chose us back. To family, they echoed. Outside, the last light of day caught the windows, turning Sterling Manor luminous. Inside, laughter rose and fell like music, the sound of a house that had remembered how to live. And in the conservatory, butterflies dried their wings, preparing for flight, trusting in transformation's promise.